And finally, our recommendations for any company, regardless of the industry you're in, to be prepared for not just the next crisis, but the changing world. Number one, collect more data and more and more. Look for opportunities to collect more data. Storage space is pretty cheap right now, but the idea is to collect as much data as you can because it will help really reveal insights for you, both in the way you operate as well as in the way your customers are operating with you. The complexity of new data requires reevaluation. It really means that you have to look at your data repositories and determine whether or not they are sufficient, in some cases necessary, because you may have some data that's really just not structured properly, and you have to redo that area. Data lakes will become important. Gathering raw, unstructured data is really, really important because it's going to allow you to do some insights in the natural language processing, artificial intelligence area, to actually really compute different opportunities that may exist or identify hotspots that may occur with these new crises or economic uptrends and downtrends. Number three, develop a data analytics strategy. We know a lot of companies that have a very good data strategy, but it's not really complemented with a data analytics strategy. Do you have the right analytics in place? Do you have the right AI machine learning in place? Doesn't mean you have to build out your data science organization. It does mean that you need a strategy behind what is involved in my data science, what partners am I working with, what other companies that are in my space that I'm going to work with, that we're going to collaborate with to create this analytic strategy, both at a near term for things like individual regions and closure, openings and closings, model changes in your current customer behavior. We could see that across the industry. And then longer term is, how these trends change. What happens if there's another crisis? Can we predict when it occurs? Can we predict if the change will go back to the way it was? These are all unknowns. Number four, use more touch point data services. So internally, you have a lot of data that is somewhat being collected by systems. Some are in Excel spreadsheets because your folks are pulling data from different marketing sources and so forth, but they're not aggregating that information in a cohesive way. Two is use the IoT. Use like Internet of Things to identify for folks what's going on. We think there's going to be a lot more with things like refrigerators, where refrigerators are going to be able to tell what's inside of it. We know that the refrigerators are getting smarter, but consider if a refrigerator has a device that can tell what's in it, and within the packaging of a product, it has an RFID or some other type of signal that can actually tell the refrigerator, I'm in here and here's how much product I have. That information can be collected, aggregated, and sent to the various retailers to say, I'm running low on a particular item, or I've had it for 3 days, it's probably going to expire, so I need to let you know that you should have another one. For like water delivery or any other type of deliveries, IoT can actually be used quite well to manage in-house inventory, personal inventory, as well as your warehouse inventory. What cars are out there, devices, computers and so forth that can constantly send this information. Gather data from ancillary unrelated services. So we're talking about this virus epidemiology type of modeling. It might be good for your company to actually collect this data and incorporate or at least monitor various models associated with COVID-19. What will then happen is you can look at your revenue curves and match the two and see where, at what point, how much is a lag? When does certain pieces hit, in terms of opening or not opening? Those are all very important. And finally, as we said before, we think using simulations are really, really important. So we advocate a lot of companies to learn how to do simulations, how to create, they don't have to be very extravagant simulations like, designing a rocket ship. It could be very, very simple simulations to model the flow of product or food from one place to another, or model the traffic that comes into a website, and look and see what happens during various times so that you can build a disaster recovery plan and a business continuity plan that includes simulated models, not just let's move everybody from one site to another and let's see if we can operate from there, because it assumes normal operation when that may or may not be the case. Simulations can also provide insight into uncertain scenarios, high peaks, and high and low valleys of various demand and surges, and how how you should respond or could respond to those types of peaks and valleys. And if you combine these things with other simulations, you can really create a very robust supply chain kind of like algorithm and know all the sensitivity traits associated with various aspects of your business. And so, in conclusion, one of the things that we're saying is that you're going to be more data centric than you ever were. You definitely need to get more data from different touch points, both with the customer and away from the customer. And when you pull all that together, you want to basically have a strategy to use it. And there are a lot of different ways, and for some companies, it makes more sense than for other companies. But at the end of the day, it's knowing what you want to do with it. A lot of companies will be using various AI and ML techniques. We don't see that changing. We think it's going to enhance, and we think that ultimately is going to be a differentiator for companies trying to survive the current economic crisis, survive it in the midterm, and as well as thrive in the long term. So that kind of concludes the presentation. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
That was good stuff, Alex. Thank you very much for sharing that today.
You're very welcome. Who was that?
That was Michael.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
Thanks. Insightful. I took a couple of notes. I'll be passing that along internally.
If you'd like the information from here, just shoot me an email. Anybody who would like it, just shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to send you the slides here. Again, if you would also like access to the data that we're pulling from a number of sources, we can also talk to you about getting you that at no charge as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, Alex, this is Sid.
Hey, Sid, how you doing?
Good, good. So, what sources of publicly available data would you be using or could use to, track some of these scenarios that you've spoken of?
Specifically on the COVID crisis?
Specifically on COVID, and let's say you had mentioned, for example, New York City potentially being the last city to open up, right?
Yep.
So
yep.
that brings up a couple of questions. One is that what does open up really mean? And
right.
Second is, New York is, given how dynamic it is, given the population, it's going to open up, and there's going to be the activity is going to jump very quickly, right, when it does. So even in a partial state of opening up, it's still going to be pretty heavy.
That's correct. Yep.
So all that said, along those lines, what does opening up mean, and what data would you use to track some of that?
Okay, so let me answer the data question first. So there are a couple of data sources that we use. We're getting information from the CDC. We're getting another one from COVID tracking and the European CDC. Those are three primary sources that we've got. Along with, we do get information from New York City. So New York City provides their own direct information. Getting it lower than a county level, or like the Nassau County that I showed you, is a little bit more difficult. Some of it is actually being tracked by hand, but it's a little bit harder to do that and make sure that it's consistent. But we're working to try and do that as best as possible. Now, in terms of open, when I use the word open, I mean fully opened at the end. It's like, how is everything going to open? It's going to open in those stages, and within those stages, there will be smaller pieces. The larger cities, I think you're going to see restrictive policies put in on certain openings to prevent people from utilizing certain services. So, for example, they're going to close the beaches, they're closing the pools. They don't want people to aggregate unless they know they have a way to mitigate the disease. That is going to be very much a city by city. So let's say you're looking at particular venues. I'll use that term, Sid, without saying more in detail. But let's say you're looking at particular venue areas. The state departments should have that information available. Some city areas should have the information available. And you would be able to trend based on the numbers, based on a few cities, of how they open up, the first few, how other people will open up. Because if something works, they're going to try and follow that as quickly as possible. Does that answer the question? Because there was a lot to your question, and I'm not sure if I got through all of the pieces.
Yeah. So one of the things we're exploring is also using traffic data patterns, right? So is traffic increasing in general, and that can be a proxy of activity and opening up, and comparing it to prior levels. Assuming it probably never goes back to the same, but um, that, that's the sort of area we're exploring in order
Yep.
to understand health and opening.
Yep. And that's a great example of ancillary data sources, using those items as a proxy for for information or for insights into other areas. Is the traffic moving up? You can also, another interesting thing would be, this is more anecdotal because it's hard to get this particular data, but if you have less shortages in particular areas, your activity is probably normal. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? If there's less?
If there's less shortages, it means that your supply chain, meaning the demand and the supply, are in balance, meaning the economic activity has come back into balance. You follow?
Right. But how would you gauge shortage?
So if it's really on reports of shortage, right? Remember we talked about unstructured data, right? So people will say, I can't find toilet paper, I can't find hair products, or I can't find this. And you'll get that from newspaper articles or from magazine articles in a particular area. So let's say you're looking at a venue, let's say we're talking about Major League Baseball. And Major League Baseball is trying to figure out that they're going to play in Arizona. They want to know when Arizona is going to open up. So if economic activity is going back to normal, one of the things they could do is analyze, various local newspapers and just harvest that data and look for both sentiment as well as things specific to shortages. Is there anything related to a shortage of product? Yeah, because we see them in the news, right? In local newspapers, they say, we're still seeing a shortage of this, or now this is the new shortage. So economic activity hasn't really returned to normal. That's kind of like an example. Does that make sense?
Yep, understood.
Any other questions out there?
Okay. Yep. I'm a lecturer and researcher at university. Can I contact you regarding getting the data?
Sure.
How the company using the data in their corporate governance and So,
Sure. I'd be happy to. I'm going to send you my email address. You will have it, and I'll be sure to. You probably have it in the email, but you can send me an email address as well, and I can easily talk to you about research for that as well.
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining from New Zealand at 4 a.m.
Yeah, it is 4 a.m. here.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's very interesting and informative.
Are there any other questions out there?
Yeah, first, I would like to thank you, Professor, for this wonderful presentation. I have beside bad news about COVID-19, I have just different perspective with regards to this issue. It is good to hear this. First, my question is that data protection is a very complicated issue, and there are some specific regulations specific to this topic, especially between USA and European Union. This is a very controversial topic. So I wonder if the effect of the possible new regulations are going to be included in these artificial intelligence models.
That's a great question. And it's hard. It's really, really hard to assess that. And I'll tell you why. The rules are kind of different, right? Especially with things like, your GDPR and your healthcare data and so forth. The rules are different in Europe than they are in the United States. And it's, you're going to need to share data somehow, but they'd have to trust each other that they're not going to utilize the data in a bad way. I don't see that happening that way in the near term, but they'll figure out ways to aggregate some data. We have a lot of statistical techniques that do not require the actual raw data. From meta-analysis techniques to obviously covariance techniques, there are many things that you can do that do not require the raw data. I can see a lot of that increasing significantly, though.
Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions out there? Okay, I think we are almost out of time. What I will do is in the chat window here, I will put in my email address for everybody, and you'll be getting a survey. Would love to hear your thoughts on this very shortly, because if you sign up with Eventbrite, you'll actually get that. I hope you guys have a wonderful and safe day, and we'll be hosting another one of these webinars with a different topic in probably 2 weeks. If you've got no other questions, again, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day and be safe.